A language can exist at the edge of its entire family tree, the southernmost outpost of a linguistic lineage that stretches from Iceland to the Bay of Bengal, and still be spoken by a population that has almost no land to stand on. 2 meters above sea level, on average, coral and salt water in every direction for 850 kilometers, no mountains, no river valleys, no continental shelf. Just a string of atolls so thin that a rising ocean could erase them inside a century. The people who live here invented a writing system in the 16th century unlike anything else on Earth, built from modified Arabic numerals repurposed as consonants, running right to left, looking Arabic to the untrained eye, but structurally unlike Arabic in almost every meaningful way. They already had 2 older scripts. They abandoned both and built something new. No other culture has done exactly this. Linguists have noted it. Nobody has fully explained it. And then there is the DNA. The mothers tell one story, the fathers tell another. And the 2 stories have been sitting in the same genome, in the same families, on the same islands for centuries, unresolved, unreconciled, and until recently, unexamined. This is the story of the Maldivians, and the truth the DNA finally revealed is stranger, older, and more layered than anything the history books prepared us for. The accepted story begins cleanly enough, and it deserves to be told with the respect it has earned across generations of scholarship. The Maldives, an archipelago of 26 atolls and more than 1,000 coral islands, stretching 850 kilometers through the northern Indian Ocean, was first settled, most historians agree, somewhere between 500 and 1500 BCs. The original migrants were Indo-Aryan peoples, most likely Proto-Sinhalese from Sri Lanka, who sailed south into open ocean and established themselves across the atolls. They brought their language, their social structures, and eventually their religion. The religion for most of Maldivian history was Buddhism. By the 3rd century BCE, at the time of Emperor Ashoka's great missionary expansion from the Indian subcontinent, Theravada Buddhism had spread across the archipelago and taken root. The evidence is physical. Stupas, domed Buddhist monuments, have been excavated on islands including Gan, Isdu, and Maladu. Local historian Hassan Ahmed Maniku, in a provisional list published in 1990, counted at least 59 islands across the archipelago with confirmed Buddhist archaeological sites. These were not small shrines, they were the structural foundations of a civilization. Buddhist monks, Buddhist kings, Buddhist architecture. For approximately 1,400 years, this was a Buddhist world. The language those people spoke was Dhivehi. German linguist Wilhelm Geiger, who conducted the first formal analysis of Dhivehi in the early 20th century, concluded that it and Sinhala, the language of Sri Lanka, are sister languages, descended from a shared Prakrit ancestor brought to both islands simultaneously from the Indian mainland. More than 70% of Dhivehi's core vocabulary traces back to Sanskrit and Pali roots. The name Maldives itself likely derives from the Sanskrit Maladvipa, garland of islands. In 1153 CE, the Buddhist king converted to Islam, reportedly after an encounter with a North African scholar. The Sultanate of Maldives was born. The pre-Islamic period was not merely set aside, it was, in the Maldivian official memory, largely erased. The history books used in Maldivian schools begin their national story at 1153. What came before is treated in that tradition as the time of ignorance. Early mosques were built on the foundations of the old temples, echoing their floor plans for generations before classical Islamic design arrived. Everything fits. The language, the archaeology, the migration route, the conversion timeline. It is a coherent story, elegantly assembled across centuries of scholarship. Except for what happens when you sequence the Y chromosome. Here is where it gets complicated. In 2013, a team of researchers published what remains the most comprehensive genetic study ever conducted on the Maldivian population. The paper, Indian Ocean Crossroads, Human Genetic Origin and Population Structure in the Maldives, by Pipe and colleagues, published in the American Journal of Physical Anthropology, Volume 151, was conducted with institutional involvement from Erasmus University Medical Center in Rotterdam. The sample was 141 unrelated Maldivians, drawn from 6 major settlements distributed across the full 800-kilometer length of the archipelago, analyzed using all 3 available genetic marker systems simultaneously: mitochondrial DNA, Y chromosome markers, and autosomal DNA. Mitochondrial DNA is a surname passed down only through the mother, a direct, unbroken lineage of women, generation after generation, stretching back through time. The Y chromosome works the same way, but in reverse: father to son, unbroken, carrying a paternal lineage across millennia. The maternal result was exactly what the history books predicted. 99.2% of Maldivian mitochondrial DNA haplogroups traced directly to South Asia. The mothers, in genetic terms, were essentially all South Asian. Every generation of women, in an unbroken line, pointed back to the Indian subcontinent. The linguistic and archaeological record confirmed. The mtDNA confirmed. The story held. Then the researchers looked at the Y chromosome. While 74.6% of male lineages did match South Asia, approximately 25%, 1 in 4 Maldivian men, carried a paternal line pointing not to South Asia, but to a Western reference population: West Asia, the Arabian Peninsula, or the ancient Near East. Clean. Expected. Then not. The specific haplogroup driving this signal was J2, designated by the marker M172. A haplogroup is like a surname carried not in writing but in the body itself, passed from father to son across thousands of years without changing. J2 is not a South Asian lineage at its origin. It is strongly associated with Southwest Asia, the Caucasus, Anatolia, and the ancient Near East, the broad arc from modern Turkey to modern Iran to the Levant. In the Maldivian male population, J2 reaches a frequency of approximately 22%, higher than its typical frequency across South Asia broadly, and at a level more commonly associated with populations from Mesopotamia or the Eastern Mediterranean than from the Indian subcontinent. The same island, the same families. The mothers, South Asian, generation after generation, 99.2%. The fathers, 1 in 4 pointing to somewhere else entirely. 2 completely different migration histories, encoded in male and female DNA, sitting side by side in the same genome without resolution. Not by a small margin, by a number that demands an explanation. The first theory is the most intuitive, and it carries genuine scientific weight: Arab and Persian maritime traders. From at least the 9th century CE onward, and arguably earlier, the Maldives occupied one of the most strategically significant positions in the pre-modern world. The archipelago sat directly across the main corridor connecting the Persian Gulf and Arabian Peninsula to India, Southeast Asia, and China. Ships did not merely pass through. The cowrie shells harvested from Maldivian reefs were among the most widely traded commodities in the ancient world, used as currency across Asia and into sub-Saharan Africa. Merchants from Oman, from Yemen, from Persia, they came regularly. Many stayed. Many married local women. Many had sons. The PIPE 2013 study itself explicitly notes that paternal admixture from West Asia is detected in the data and does not dismiss this explanation. The atoll by atoll founder effect, each atoll developing its own independent male lineage history due to the reduced movement of men between islands, which the same study documents, would amplify any small founding group of traders into a significant percentage within a few generations. One Arab merchant who settled and fathered sons could, over 2 centuries of island endogamy, become 20% of an atoll's male lineage. After 1153 CE, the Islamic conversion added another layer of reinforcement. Arab and Persian identity carried religious prestige in the new social order. Intermarriage with men of Arab descent became not just common, but actively favorable within a society restructuring itself around Islamic identity. The first theory, then, says the J2 signal is medieval. It is the genetic residue of the trade routes. It is the signature of commerce and conversion written into the paternal line. But here is the problem. If the J2 elevation were purely a product of medieval Arab traders moving through established commercial routes, we would expect to see it concentrated in the northern atolls, the ones geographically closest to the Arabian Sea, the ones that saw the most consistent maritime traffic. Instead, the PIPA study found a genetic substructure across the archipelago that, in the researchers' own words, is not directly related to geographic distance. The signal is distributed in a pattern that does not follow the trade routes, and that absence of a gradient is by itself a problem the first theory cannot fully answer. This is the part the records don't explain. The second theory is more complicated, and it requires reaching further back, much further back, than medieval commerce. The J2 signal in Maldivian males may not be medieval at all. It may be ancient. Researchers have established that haplogroup J-M172, the parent lineage of J2, has deep roots in the pre-modern Near East. An analysis by Bettini and colleagues, published in 2015, estimated the origin of JM172 at between 19,000 and 24,000 years before present. This is not a medieval lineage. This is a Pleistocene-era lineage, older than agriculture, older than writing, older than the Bronze Age by a substantial margin. The second theory proposes that the J2 frequencies in the Maldives reflect not Arab traders of the 9th century, but early maritime populations of the Persian Gulf and Indus Valley coastal corridor, seafarers active during the Bronze Age or earlier, moving through Indian Ocean waters before the formal trade routes of the historical period were ever established. J2 appears in connection with Neolithic agricultural expansion, with early Bronze Age maritime cultures of the Arabian Sea, and with populations associated with the ancient Indus Valley civilization. If any of these early maritime groups reached the atolls, even in small numbers, even briefly, the founder effect mathematics would carry the lineage forward across thousands of years. The archaeological record offers a suggestive, if inconclusive, footnote. When the Norwegian explorer Thor Heyerdahl conducted government-authorized excavations of Maldivian Hwita mounds in the mid-1980s, he found carved stone artifacts whose stylistic characteristics he believed showed connections to the ancient Indus Valley. His interpretation that the mounds were sun temples proved incorrect. They were Buddhist stupas. But the underlying question he was asking, about pre-Sinhalese contact between the Indus corridor and the Maldives, has never been formally closed. The question remains archaeologically open. Researchers are careful to frame this as probability, not certainty. No dedicated ancient DNA work has been conducted on pre-Islamic Maldivian skeletal remains. The Bronze Age hypothesis requires early J2 carrying maritime populations to have been systematically active in this region centuries before the documented Sinhalese settlement, plausible given what we know of ancient Indian Ocean seafaring, but not yet confirmed. The third, and the one most researchers are hesitant to say out loud, is the possibility embedded in the shape of the data itself. Look at the pattern again. Maternal ancestry, 99.2% South Asian. Paternal ancestry, roughly 25% pointing to West Asia. The women carry one story, the men carry another. The same island, the same families, the same genome, and a sex-specific divergence of that magnitude. Population geneticists have encountered this pattern before, not in the Maldives, but in other parts of the world where historical events left a specific genetic signature. Incoming male populations overlaying or replacing existing male lineages, while the local female population remained largely in place. The DNA does not record the circumstances under which this happens. It records only the outcome. Whether the asymmetry reflects trade, migration, settlement, displacement, or something else entirely, the data does not distinguish between these possibilities. Researchers are careful not to overread this. The pattern is consistent with peaceful intermarriage across many generations. It is also consistent with other scenarios. The data doesn't confirm any single reading. It only fails to rule them out. And then there is the detail from Gnaviani. In the southernmost inhabited atoll of the entire archipelago, the most isolated, the most linguistically distinct, the furthest from the Arabian Sea trade routes, the PIPA 2013 study found 2 carriers of Y chromosome haplogroup A, designated M91. Haplogroup A is one of the deepest rooting lineages in the entire human Y chromosome tree. It is found almost exclusively in sub-Saharan Africa. The study notes it is rarely found outside Africa apart from recent migration events. 2 men, 1 atoll. No maternal African signal anywhere in the dataset. The same sex asymmetric pattern, pointed now not toward the Near East but toward Africa. What came through Gnaviani? When? And under what circumstances? The DNA does not record consent, it records outcomes. No ancient DNA work has been done on pre-Islamic Maldivian remains. The timing of every signal in this data, medieval, ancient, or somewhere between, remains undated. The question of when is also, in this case, the question of why, and that question is still open. Imagine you are standing on Gnaviani at dusk. The ocean here turns the color of oxidized copper when the sun drops below the line between water and sky, a line that, from this atoll, is visible in every direction simultaneously. The humidity sits at roughly 30 degrees, thick enough to taste. The smell is coral reef and low tide, and the particular salt of a sea that has been moving across this same stretch of ocean since before any human was here to name it. The dialect spoken on this island, a variety of Dhivehi, distinct enough that linguists classify it separately from the standard spoken in the capital, drifts through the air from somewhere you cannot see. Every family name you encounter is Arabic. Every mosque points toward Mecca. The official founding of this civilization, in the calendar everyone here uses, is 1153 CE. Someone hands you a piece of paper. It is a genealogy, hand-copied from an older document, tracing a family line back as far as the records go. Every name is Arabic. Every ancestor is Muslim. The lineage begins, in the written record, with the Sultanate. But the Y chromosome haplogroup at the root of that family tree is older than Arabic by 20,000 years. It is older than Islam by 20,000 years. It is older than the Sinhalese settlement, older than Buddhism in these islands, older than any name anyone on this atoll has ever been given. Behind you, barely visible under the grass, is a low coral hill, a hawita. Under it, if anyone excavated, they would find carved stone blocks. Buddhist stupas, reduced by centuries of islanders removing the material for building houses, until what remains is just a gentle rise in the land that most people here no longer know the origin of. You are standing on the southernmost point of the Indo-European world, in a place whose official memory begins precisely at the moment its older memory was set aside. Here is the reframe, and this is the part that changes what everything before it means. The Maldives did not accumulate these layered genetic signals despite being small and isolated. It accumulated them because of it. Every group that passed through, Bronze Age seafarers, Sinhalese settlers, Arab merchants, unknown others, left a paternal trace in exactly the proportion that the island's social structure allowed. They could not overwhelm the existing population because there was no large landmass to displace anyone on. They could only layer. The atolls, distributed across 850 kilometers of ocean with no connecting land, forced every wave of male arrivals into the same pattern: integrate, marry into the existing female population, father sons into a society already rooted in place. The women stayed, the men moved. The PIPA 2013 study found precisely this. Reduced female-mediated gene flow between atolls confirms a Maldives-specific history of matrilocality. Women remaining on their home atolls, men arriving and departing. The society was structured, at its roots, around female permanence and male mobility. The DNA did not create that structure. The structure created the DNA. And then consider what happened in the 16th century. The Portuguese occupied the Maldives from 1558 to 1573. 15 years of colonial rule, ended by a local uprising. In the immediate aftermath, within a generation, the Maldivians invented the Thana script, a writing system built from modified Arabic numerals, running right to left, visually Arabic enough to satisfy the demands of Islamic identity, but structurally unlike any other writing system on Earth. They abandoned 2 existing scripts and built something that belonged entirely to them. Historians have read this as Islamicization, the final consolidation of a Muslim identity after colonial disruption. But look at it from the genetic and linguistic record, and the act reads differently. The people who had just survived foreign rule did not simply adopt an external identity. They constructed a container for their own, something that looked like integration from the outside, and functioned as distinctness from within. The Maldivians were not assimilating, they were encoding. What looked like a simple South Asian island people origin story is, in the DNA, a record of at least 3 distinct waves of male migration: pre-Sinhalese, Indo-Aryan, and West Asian, all absorbed across 2,500 years into a female-anchored social structure that held its fundamental shape through every wave, every conversion, every occupation. The ocean was not the obstacle. The ocean was the architecture. The Maldives is not an exception to Indian Ocean history. It is its most legible expression. Every population that ever moved across that ocean left a genetic mark somewhere. The trade routes, the monsoon winds, the cowrie shell economies, the missionary voyages, the merchant marriages, all of it is written into genomes along coastlines from East Africa to maritime Southeast Asia. But most coastal populations grew large enough, connected enough to land masses, that these signals blurred across generations of mixing, migration, and displacement. The Maldives stayed small. It stayed isolated. Its social structure preserved the maternal line in near-perfect clarity, while the paternal line collected arrivals across millennia. What that produced, for researchers willing to look closely enough, is a record of the Indian Ocean itself. Not the clean diplomatic history of trade agreements and royal conversions, but the raw, ungoverned, contact-driven history of what actually happened when people from different parts of the world reached the same piece of coral in the middle of the sea. An elder from one of the southern atolls, someone whose family name is Arabic, whose faith is Islam, whose daily language is a Dhivehi dialect no one in the capital fully understands, carries in his Y chromosome a lineage whose origin geneticists date to somewhere between 19,000 and 24,000 years before the word Maldives was ever spoken. He is the continuation of something that has no written beginning. He is the archive. We build national identities on origin stories that are, by definition, incomplete. The Maldivians have an official history that begins in 1153 CE, and a genome that begins at least 24,000 years earlier, shaped by people whose names are unrecorded, whose languages are lost, whose arrival left no chronicle, only a frequency in a dataset published in 2013. A genome is a palimpsest, a manuscript scraped and rewritten over and over, where the older texts bleed through the newer ones if you know how to read the marks. The Maldivian genome is one of the most heavily inscribed palimpsests in the Indian Ocean basin. Every layer is still there. Most of the authors are still unknown. The Maldivians were never who we thought. The DNA has finally revealed the truth. And the truth is not a single origin or a clean answer. It is the record of how many different people, across how many different centuries, became one people on a strip of coral barely above the waterline, and how much of what they were was never, until now, allowed to be remembered.